So throughout the pandemic, I kept a running diary, which was like a poem. And the poem became a vessel into which I could put my observations of life in quarantine, how New York City was changing, how I was trying to adapt to it. And I felt that this was a place for me to reckon with our experience here in this city, but knowing that it was very similar in other places. So when I sent the poem to Laura Harrison, it was such a treat for me to discover the parallels that she seemed to feel through her experience in Chicago.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what Lynn said, when I got Lynn's text, I was also experiencing a similar phenomenon of feeling that I was constantly in the present, which the poem seems to capture for me, and that this ever-present moment feels sort of tyrannical in a way. So it was sort of a relief to find some space in the text, at least a reflection or like a relationship between what I'm experiencing, and it's not just me. So there was like a little bit of carving out of time, actually, in this relationship with Lynn to her text. So I tried to give the sense of what the text evoked for me, which is this sort of clinging to the moment, and not so much a nostalgia for the past, but perhaps a longing for a sense of space within time. So I hope that that was coming through. And I think, Lynn, that we did kind of evoke that together somehow. And I hope that in people watching this, they can get a little bit of like breath or air or something, at least with it.
Starting in mid-March, and in the early months of the pandemic, when we all sheltered in place, time melted. We'd ask each other, what day is this? One marker of time passing was seeing the New Yorker in my mailbox each Wednesday, a magazine that's been part of my life forever, stacks around the house when I was growing up, and again now. During those sequestered months, I was drawn to the titles of each section of the magazine. Those perennial headers radiated with new meaning. So this New Yorker wrote a poem and sent it to Quin in California.
After reading Dee Dee's poem and committing it to memory, I took a long walk. It was dusk, and California's Colorado desert was still 109 degrees Fahrenheit. A gentle breeze put large palm fronds in motion, and it seemed they were speaking with the poem in my head. Filming the visual communication, then setting the poem to spoken word, the piece united two seemingly separate parts, expressing a global, even universal, connection.
This video was shot early one morning, shortly after the North Complex fire started in Northern California, enveloping half the state in a sea of toxic smoke. It's representative of those early morning hours and the moments between night and daybreak when it's just you and the voice in your head reminding you of all your worries and doubts. The spell is usually broken by early morning bird songs, but the birds weren't chirping that day.
I received this piece and immediately thought of the collapse of my sense of individual self in relation to the rest of the world, and how this has been a progressive move towards collectivization, which has been both painful and also sort of exhilarating. I also felt that time had collapsed in on itself. And so this sort of topsy-turvy nature of the cartwheeling movement of Kathleen's piece made me think of a sort of very old woman maybe entering into a liminal state of death from life. And that's where we're sort of at right now, is this kind of borderland between life and death and self and others.
Collapse into a sea of selves.
So I had created a poem actually that was based on a dream I'd had about Airbnbs in California, which are normally so immaculate. But given, I guess, COVID and the fires, my subconscious was, I think, trying to tell me or signal that there was a decay, a process of decay sort of happening. I mean, also throughout our country. So I think that the dream was illuminating all of that. So I tried to paint from a dream. And I didn't really think consciously about fires, because actually COVID was the thing that was raging through California at that moment. But I think I must have known subconsciously, because the colors I selected were incredibly hot. And the actual brush strokes had a kind of scabrous quality. And so it was interesting to turn it over to Lynne and have her articulate what was actually lurking behind my dream, which I think was, in fact, these fires, but maybe in a bigger way, a sort of crumbling at the heart of our country.
So I received Laura's painting, and it was exactly at the time when so much of California was burning. So it was very much on my mind, and I decided to watch the film over and over again, and to write in a very responsive way, in a way that I've actually never done before. I just reacted to her gestures and took in the moment in which I was living. And also, I should say that I was reading Bernadette Mayer's memory around the same time, and her writing, her like fragmentation of structure was very different from how I normally write, but very, very refreshing, and I think also inspired by some of the exercises that Paolo Javier gave to us during the workshop when we were all writing and making images together. So those two influences converged in my response to this amazing animated painting.
Transformed by the pandemic, San Francisco is a barren city of empty buildings, a wasteland of abandoned people wandering hopelessly under billboards reading, "We're in this together."
The city morphs, disintegrates.
When Quin sent me her imagery, I had an immediate and very lovely, spontaneous reaction in the form of 8 words that came to be a poem.
These are the words of an anxious mind in the middle of a 5-alarm fire trying to still itself.
Kathleen's poem conveyed a silent scream. I was shaken. Because I'm glued to my phone these days, like so many people, it was on that small screen that I returned to Kathleen's poem again and again, wherever I happened to be. One afternoon, her poem illuminated how our current behaviors mimic the natural world.
So I had a dream about a California Airbnb, and also it was being conflated with the Oscars. And this was right around the time that COVID was like roaring in California, and like right before the forest fires started up in earnest. So I think I was like anticipating disaster, because there was like a lot of red in the dream. There was a red carpeted steps that I just thought of as flames. And one of the lines of the poem that I came up with in relation to the dream was this idea of bereft of care.
In Airbnbs bereft of charm, a California with no care, risk and no nonsense. And of course, we've been hearing from our dear leader, about the forest floor. And of course, that struck me as just bullshit, but just lack of care generally has been something that's been on my mind. And that the failure of care overall is leading to all of these problems, like everything, the failure of justice for, Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery or any number of people who've been shot by the police in the last, 5 to 10 years. The climate change, like all of this is a result of corporations essentially not taking responsibility, whatever, everybody knows all this, but this is what has led me, I think, to come up with this poem, which I then gave to Freshta to interpret.
Thanks, Laura. I was so glad that you decided to record yourself reading the text. I loved that I had that choice, and I wanted to keep that. And also, as I was thinking about other people hearing it, thinking that I wanted people to have space to really hear and really just listen and focus on the words. I wanted the words to kind of be a little heavier.
About the importance of sticking with things no matter what. Scary squares we fall behind.
You said something about scary squares, which seemed to be about something about current remote communications on video calls, which I may be wrong, but then that evoked this image of like tiny sharp rocks. And I was thinking about how sand can be smooth when it's wet, but it's also an accumulation of many particles and edges. And so and you mentioned there's exhuming the dead and things sticking together. And there was a lot that resonated with me even while it seemed to be very specific to another place. So one of the activities that's pretty critical to my well-being is spending time outdoors and taking walks on trails and parks that provide a bit of respite from urban life. But unfortunately, during the pandemic, I haven't been able to do this as often as I'd like. And a few months in, as it became clear that the pandemic was not going away anytime soon, the comfortable days of spring were beginning to dwindle. And that has to do with the fact that summers in Miami are pretty harsh. So while everyone else is posting on social media, getting outside more, we here in South Florida, it was getting so hot, and it was the time when we were starting to stay indoors. And basically that's our hibernation time, waiting for these milder winter months. So my walks were less frequent, and each one felt very special and crucial. So I encountered this raccoon on one of my walks, and it was one of the few beings I've had a chance to interact with during a summer of relative isolation. And I have a lot of these little videos that I make on my walks, and I'm not sure why I collect them. It's kind of a diary practice, and I thought it seemed to be a good fit for this exchange.
And as I watched the raccoon make its way through this liminal space between nature and culture, I began to project a dystopic future onto it, in which everything that is currently cultivated eventually disintegrates into chaos, and the scavengers of the world are left picking through the ruins to figure out what went wrong.
When the quarantine began in the spring, a friend of mine said, when you can't go out, go in. And so I was thinking a lot about, being inside yourself, inside your space. But then I also started to notice and pay attention to the way that the light comes in at different times of the day, and became very aware of subtle changes in the light and the way that through the light, so the outside comes in. And so that video that I sent you, in a way, it's like a certain time of day when the light comes in through a window and shines the trees outside onto not shines, their shadows come onto the wall behind my desk. And so it was a play with inside and outside. And I thought that it was related to the way that we met and then our whole project because of the way that it came out during the quarantine also.
Yeah, I totally got that. Yeah, I felt that what you're saying, and I loved it. And I've been looking at the trees outside my windows as well, more than before, and like noticing things, noticing how beautiful they are. And somehow it all went to a book that I read the previous summer, which is called The Mushroom of the End of the World, which is about this Matsutake mushrooms. It's an amazing book. And these mushrooms were the only thing that grew after the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. And they grow after pine forests burn down. And they're very valuable. There are a lot of, people, pickers, like in Oregon and in Japan. And because the image was very stylized and abstract, I wanted to do the sounds. I found some sounds of trees burning and sounds of wind in the forest. And I think there are some birds there too. It was fun.
I was actually filming some stained glass art for a completely different project, and I thought that it was very appropriate for the time that was in it. It's a little bit earlier, the summer, late summer, early autumn 2020, and for me there was something kind of free fall about it that was appropriate to the time, and that's why I sent Caroline this imagery.
Yeah, I got this really colorful abstract imagery from Moira, from you, and I was telling you it reminded me a lot of these kind of touristy but interesting colorful sand hourglass timers that they sell in a lot of tourist shops in Maine where I live. And so with the imagery I thought a little bit about time, and so I was thinking about and what fills our minds and my mind in this particular time, which includes the pandemic and kind of this great social change, some painful, some necessary, all this stuff. And I was telling, one of the things that came to my mind was that during the pandemic in particular, all the things that kind of flood into my mind feel like sometimes they take up equal importance, and kind of how to navigate through that throughout the day. So my fan won't turn on, and me missing somebody I love. How is it possible that those two things feel equally weighted? And I was just thinking about is that like a symptom of this pandemic where we're kind of, as human beings, struggling to catch up to all the stuff that we're processing together or apart? So I was just thinking a lot about that as I put the words to the really beautiful imagery that you sent, and I started to see it as just like maybe a postcard to my future self or our future selves from this particular time. And then I added the choir in. It was just a found sound. I think it's a choir from Mexico, and I don't understand the words. I don't speak Spanish, but I like the idea of the uplift and the believing in something greater. So even though there was this like low level anxiety in maybe my words, it was kind of like the choir gave a bit of something to be hopeful for, seeing something bigger than just this moment. So that's all.
Great. And I love that, as I said earlier to you, I love that your response had that free fall momentum of the imagery.
Yeah.
I came across a group of oyster catchers while strolling the shore in Long Beach, New York. Besides their elegance, those red beaks, I was struck by their socializing behind the dune fence, truly free as a bird. Their dance evoked for me the tension of these times and how we test our closeness or distance from each other and trespass those barriers at our peril, which Fereshte then transformed with her words and a startling new piece of film.
Thanks, Dee Dee. I was just thinking when I saw your contribution and thinking about how to respond that it was a beach, an ocean, and I knew not exactly where, but also I'm here near the ocean in Miami, but recently we had this big fish kill. So many fish were washing up on shore dead. And this connection of the sea that kind of binds us all as the adhesive of this planet, and feeling that came to mind. But then, you know, that kind of liberating sense of the birds that I enjoy watching too at the beach. But then the pan to the sign of the restriction on swimming. And so I wanted to make this connection with my place and your place. And so I included some of my own image, and I did take some liberties with that. But then the words came from this old instructional film from the Prelinger archive of a life-saving film, like how to rescue someone from a drowning. And the reference to the breath really seemed relevant for us today.
Yes.
So thank you for initiating that.
My poem preceded Kathleen's video. The poem came out of feelings I have while experiencing the heart of a city I am familiar with. Times when the city itself speaks to me through my senses. Sounds and smells ignite memories of those things I left within it as they speak to me.
The poem sounded to me like a rumination on one's past, feeling the weight of one's choices and the paths taken and not taken. In order to illustrate this, I stitched together a stream of images using several different home movies from the Prelinger archives. I was really interested in the parts of the films that were in between, like when the camera has just started running or is moving between subjects. So the imagery became more about the small moments when decisions are still being made or processed before the monumental moments are inscribed in one's life story.
Longings at our gathering of aunt and cousins. If I could, I'd be out dancing toe to toe.
I have known Lynne for all of 34 years, in which case there is a level of intimacy and personal history exposed in the little poem I decided to send to her at the height of when we couldn't hug each other in 2020.
I wanted to enter Moira's poem through my body and also through my awareness of her relationship to the women going back multiple generations in her life. So I wanted to connect not only with the ocean, but with the skin of her grandmother and all the different layers of relationships and textures that she alludes to in her poem.
I was profoundly touched to see Lynne's beautiful naked body wandering through her hall. And the first time I ever met Lynne, she showed me a film in which she was also naked. So there was a beautiful full circle in this relationship for me.
I also wanted to include a sense of interior intimacy and a kind of departure, because I felt like in Moira's work, we have that sense of the domestic, and we also had this sense of adventure, and I wanted to have both. And that I actually used these old slides, glass slides that I'd found, and I went through them and looked for images of women and oceans.
For this piece, I sent Moira some words about hurricanes and a place in Texas called Galveston that is constantly under the threat of kind of just destruction from things like hurricanes, and then rebuild and regrowth, and then another storm comes. So I was thinking a lot about just how you learn to love and love people and love the place that you're in when it's kind of under a constant threat. You picked me up and took me to Galveston, a city wound around hurricanes.
When I received Caroline's text, I literally didn't know where I was. And it was a great journey for me to go and discover where Galveston was. The geography was mixed with this lovely sensuality in the words. And so I wanted to choose something that mirrored the physical geographic space, but at the same time mirrored this idea of being in the eye of the storm. And so it's amazing. I chose a town in northern Spain where I'd done a little bit of filming and used that. And it's probably not unlike Galveston in terms of having an industrial base and then just having this beautiful sea, sensuous sea environment. So, and then I felt there was a tension between the warmth of being in the eye of the storm and the impending hurricane. And so I wanted to insert a little sense of that danger and have you bring forward that tension.
I had made this this text that it ended up in the piece as a result of a water meditation that someone else guided me in. And so during this meditation, we were asked to take a sip of water and to hold it in our mouth and kind of contemplate upon it. I just thought, this is a very unusual little text, and I'm curious to see what would happen. And so then I passed that along to you.
I live in Montevideo, Uruguay, and here we have a tradition, like the slaves, when they came from Africa, they used to call each other with the drumming. So we had this, our more traditional, most traditional national music is called candombe, and it's a rhythm that you create with 3 different drums doing 3 different things. You can hear it mostly Saturday and Sunday. You can hear it at some point in the afternoon. And then I thought of the fish. I thought there was something happening there, and I like the idea of connecting South Florida with Uruguay. You know,
I love that it's in your voice.
Someone said we live honest.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting anything in particular, because it was very much like kind of a stream of consciousness writing. Like I just thought this has its own shapelessness, and you were going to give it some shape. And was interesting, in another pairing I had, Dee Dee shared images of the ocean with me from where she is. So it's just, I feel like there is something else that's connecting and being passed along between us all.
This peach tree is like every year the squirrels, like they start stealing them before they're ripe. Like they take one bite out of a peach and then drop it, and then take one bite, drop it. So we're always on this sort of battle with the squirrels, like if we'll ever get any peaches. And this year they ate every single peach. We didn't even get one.
And when you made the video, were you thinking about all those things? Yeah.
Well, actually, I think I was thinking more about how it was sort of still through the pandemic frame there, where I was thinking a little bit about how, and before the pandemic, that like animals and even plants and trees kind of only get a break from human beings and are like boisterous, loud cars and everything that we do. And they only got a break at night when we slept. Like when the humans would go to sleep, the trees and the animals would kind of have their time to show. But that how during the pandemic, at least early on, I remember thinking that like the trees got to breathe a little bit, and how like the days for the trees turned into turned into the night kind of. So it's like humans weren't around as much, driving and spitting out pollution. And so yeah, it's just that humans were a little bit more quiet during the daylight. Then we were kind of walking and not driving, or slowing down a little bit. So I was thinking a little bit about that.
Well, so it makes sense for what I said, because it was all about basically the pandemic. And I think because the frame was, it was like a close-up, and that's why I had this idea of asphyxiated and all these things. And I just really, in that one, I just, improvised. I looked at the image and I started talking, and that's what I used. I didn't change anything. It's not even written. It's like, or maybe it is written, but
That's so cool. I didn't know that.
But it was more like improvising, looking at the images, kind of like jazz, something like that.
Wrapped, cocooned, wild.
Working with Dee Dee was really an extraordinary experience, because I took the image outside. I took it to nature. I listened to the symphony of a rainfall. I had no idea that she was going to pull the raindrops and the rhythm of the precipitation into a space that was very much about culture and about urban life. And that contrast and that engagement was just so exciting for me.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. Lynn's film, when she sent it to me, enveloped me in longing. That falling rain was like a heavy, sparkling curtain. And I found myself grieving for lost pleasures. In my poem, I was reaching for the details of our old life, as if recalling a dream or distant history.
My mom she doesn't have Alzheimer's, but it's almost the same. And she's like far gone. And I thought about her closets. Her closets are full of her clothes that she no longer wears, because she just wears, stuff to be around the house, like her shoes or purses,
Yeah.
And then I thought about this idea. It was very real, actually. It was not like,
I could tell.
it was just, like mixture of being the pandemic and being able to see her less because of the pandemic, and also thinking about where her clothes are gonna end up.
I caress her clothes. Her cupboard a museum of things not worth remembering.
I love what you did with it.
I love the poem. Your words were so powerful that I wanted to have just like the cleome, I think it's called, the purple spiky flower. It looks kind of prehistoric in my garden. And I kind of just wanted it to be like the landscape portal that your memories rode on a little, like they rode across the landscape of the flower actually. And so I was thinking, your words made me think about like how lately, and this is similar to what you said, how our old memories have become the new ones during this time when we're not able to create new memories with the people we love or the people that we usually interact with. And like the way we moved about our like normal lives before the pandemic. So when you said she didn't recognize me before the gloves and masks, I love that. And it got me thinking about how the pandemic has created these sort of like accidental and unexpected conditions and internal spaces for us to kind of recall and reflect on memories of loved family and friends that may have happened a long time ago. And so really there's been a death of some kinds of memories during the pandemic, but a birth of new ones and a new kind of time that we get to spend with people that we love.
You have some sound.
Yeah.
And that was like, I could have never done that. I could have never done what you did. So that's why I thought it was magical, because I would have never thought of flowers and the way the camera moves also, and with the music, it just came alive.
Wrestling my spirit to the floor, I swallow myself whole to fit into your wound. Well, I'm here to help introduce the collaboration between Quin and I, and I'm so grateful because I've been carrying that set of words around with me for, I don't remember how long, but for a really long time. And so when this collaboration, opportunity to collaborate came up, I just thought, maybe it's time that I share that. And so where it comes from is, in a way, it came out of my desire, my need actually, to express the feeling of intergenerational trauma, which is really a feeling that's like love and pain kind of mixed up together, and how you're birthed through that relationship. But also, I guess in psychological language, they call it a narcissistic wound, and how intimate that kind of toxic, that kind of toxic bond is. So I needed a place to put that out into the world, and so and transform it actually. And so this became that.
And when I received the words, I thought they were incredibly deep. I sat with them for a long time, actually many days, and they invoked visions of the moon. And so I utilized the harvest moon that we just had, the full moon, to hold the rest of the images. For me, it spoke to the unseen aspects of love and our origins on this planet, the origin of life. So I put that together along with an orchid. So I kept seeing the voice and the words as being spoken through an orchid. So those were the three parts that I put together to create the film.
Thank you.
I was really glad when I got paired up with Sujani, because we'd had a nice kind of serendipitous moment much earlier in this overall project. So I was really happy to be able to collaborate again. And very specifically, the piece I chose felt right in the continuity of that overall, as well as in the moment. And it was just like a moment of light and brightness and softness and joy and stillness that I had experienced coming to the end of the summer. And I thought this was the right piece to send to Sujani.
And I was so delighted when I received it, which maybe if whoever's watching watches the whole thing will see that I sent something to another one of our collaborators that's actually also a picture of light coming in through a window and playing on the walls. And so when I saw Maura's picture, it kind of, or video, it reinforced that connection she was talking about that we had in the collaboration earlier. And it just felt like such serendipity. And I was really taken by the way the light was playing in that particular video and how it reminded me of water. And it took me, and the words that I said were really true, it took me to a real place. It's a very special place in the woods in upstate New York that I have spent a lot of time in, where you can stand on top of a mossy bank and watch the river turn from roaring into something soft and smooth. And I've always stood there kind of feeling like I wanted to be in the soft and smooth part, even though I always feel like I'm actually in the roaring part. But it's a very profound place for me. We actually scattered the ashes of one of my friends who owned the property there at that creek. And so it was really special to get something that reminded me of that. Still moving, I see shimmery water on your wall in waves that take me to the banks of a babbling brook.
And I really love that you brought water to air and light. And so that allowed me to then bring the sounds, the very distant sounds of water. So I like that the elements actually, there was a kind of unusual placing of the elements together.
Yeah, and earth too, in terms of the river, right? Yeah, and earth too. So we have all the elements.
Just on a wall on an early morning.
Yes, beautiful. So thank you for that.
And thank you.